Oh God said it's what I live for. It's why I'm alive. I'm never smothered the fire. From burning and I'm at the point.
What's going on, guys? Hey, we've got some breaking news here in the global situation of what's happening with that doesn't make sense. We have some breaking news regarding Ukraine, Russia, the United States. That's what I'm trying to say. There's been reports that the CIA director, I believe, traveled to Russia to have some kind of secret meeting. And now there's speculation that it's because of this threat that Russia wants to do some kind of an invasion or attack of some kind on a NATO member. There's multiple different or theories of why, but this is really, really big news, dude. There's absolutely there's no known reason at the moment that this guy should be going to Russia. And last time we've seen a move like this between the U.S. and Russia was just before Russia full-scale invaded Ukraine. The U.S. sent somebody from the CIA to try to basically talk Putin out of it, and then the CIA guy left, and Putin invaded Ukraine immediately. So this is going to be interesting. It's a Preston Stewart video. He's going to go into it in depth. That's why I want to watch it, his video, because he always covers it really well. You know what? Let's just jump into it because I want to see what's going on.
So yesterday, the CIA director flew unannounced.
Like, comment, subscribe. Please check out Preston's channel if you haven't already. Let me minimize myself so I don't get yelled at in the comments. Boop. Let's go.
So yesterday, the CIA director flew unannounced to Moscow, and the last time this happened was in late 2021 to warn Putin that we knew he was about to invade Ukraine in the hopes that he would back off. Now, no doubt something important is going on behind the scenes, but as of right now, it's all speculation. So today we're going to take a look at what we do know so far, as well as some assessments from the Russian and the American side. Now, personally, I think Russia is in the process and is planning to continue testing NATO to see if Article 5 will actually hold. And what we saw play out yesterday was the United States letting Russia know that we know what they're up to and trying to talk them off that ledge. Now, I do want to stress that the official U.S. stance right now is that this was nothing. President Trump just a few hours ago said, "I hate to disappoint people. This was a pretty semi-routine visit," talking about how it was just focused on bringing the war in Ukraine to an end, which I don't believe. And the reason for that is this is an unannounced CIA visit at the highest level in a military transport with no additional information before, during, or after. They didn't meet with Putin.
Nah, this definitely strikes me as some kind of like emergency meeting, basically, that Trump was like, get on the plane and go.
They didn't meet with negotiators. It was intelligence head to intelligence head. That is very rare for it to take place, especially to take place in Moscow. So yeah, something is up here. Now, the New York Times, in reporting on this for some details, said a military C-17 cargo plane had flown from Andrews Air Force Base near Washington, D.C., and landed in Moscow after a stop in Riga, the capital of Latvia. That was followed by reports of a motorcade with diplomatic plates in the Russian capital. And on the Russian side, Peskov, the Kremlin spokesperson, did stress that there were no direct contacts. This was not a meeting between Putin and Ratcliffe. It was exclusively with the intelligence services.
That's interesting.
The Wall Street Journal, talking about this, said the U.S. has collected intelligence showing Russia's early preparations for a possible military mobilization in Ukraine and plans for testing the North Atlantic Treaty Organization's resolve. Now, that was picked up as this is exactly why the meeting took place, and there's no evidence to support that. This is speculation. All right. I think these are things that we know. We know Russia is in the process right now of rolling out a mobilization this fall. We still have yet to see what it will actually look like. We have some Russian assessments here in a minute that think that might be the reason for this visit. The other one that I'm in this camp, personal opinion, this is about testing NATO, trying to see if Article 5 is still going to hold. But again, the Wall Street Journal is saying this is what it could be. They don't have sources saying that's what it is.
You know, and there's a third option that I think should be thought about. It's the fact that it has been documented by multiple sources at this point and proven, including by the Pentagon, that Russia is directly helping Iran target United States military personnel and assets. So that should be something that's mentioned as well. And that would be a job of the CIA director, I would imagine, to go talk with their intelligence agencies saying, "Hey, stop giving them information." You know, that's a third option I think should be thought about.
They did quote Beth Sanner, a former U.S. Deputy Director of National Intelligence, that said, quote, "It could be to say, we know what you're thinking about doing, and you better not. It also could be about the Iran ceasefire and putting someone else into that discussion." She added that Ratcliffe might also touch upon the Kremlin's support for Iran following a new U.S. sanctions campaign against the regime.
I guess if I just shut up and watched the video, I would have seen that.
In fact, there's already been some reporting on that from what I would refer to as a less than reliable source. I'm going to bring it up here just because of the amount of traction that it's gotten so far. I know it's a dangerous game playing whack-a-mole with what I think to not be true, but given that this assessment is like 3 million views over on X in the first 12 hours, I'm already seeing it repeated by people that I put some trust in. I feel like it's at least worth addressing. This is the Hormuz letter. It's an account based in Europe. Don't know anything beyond that. They said that Russian officials have briefed Iran that the CIA director's visit was to deliver a message asking Moscow to press Iran into reopening the Strait of Hormuz, warning that Russian entities would otherwise face designations under Operation Economic Outcast. Russia declined and told Iran the threatened measures were of limited consequence, according to 2 senior Iranian sources with knowledge of the briefing. Look, that type of thing very well might be happening. I mean, it fits with other current events. That's not a intel head to intel head type discussion. It just isn't.
Right.
But again, we're seeing this pick up a lot of steam right now because it is showing the United States kind of on our knees begging Russia to please help us with the Strait of Hormuz. I don't think that that's a reason. That's generally not a reason that we would see the CIA director travel secretly, but still known, which is kind of an interesting aspect.
If it was something diplomacy related, odds are they would have sent Jared Kushner or Steve Witkoff, right? They're the ones who have ties with Russia. They're the ones who have kind of a little bit more leverage over there in the Russian side of things. You wouldn't send Ratcliffe. They sent Ratcliffe for a reason, and it's probably because he's holding information that only Ratcliffe is allowed to have. Ratcliffe's level of clearance and above, right? So it's got to be a big deal, man. Otherwise, send one of the other thousands of CIA agents and probably some that are even stationed in Russia.
Back here,
or send, you probably don't want to out their cover if they're undercover, but
it was not announced and it was not advertised during, before, or after, but they still flew on a plane that was known to flight trackers. So people knew that there was a VIP moving. It was just kind of under the surface of who it actually was. That's not the type of thing you do to negotiate the reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. That's honestly, there's a lot of other people that can carry on that conversation. Now, turning to the Russian assessment, Chris Owicki over on X, I think, did a great job rolling together some Russian mill bloggers. We'll have all of these in the description below. The first one he looked at was Dmitriev, who essentially said this is probably the same as what it was in 2021, where the United States came over to warn us and say, we know what's happening and give us a little bit of a heads up, us, the Russians, in that sense. So he said there are only 2 scenarios that that Ratcliffe would have traveled to Moscow. The first is nuclear, as in the use of nuclear weapons is on the table. The second is to stop the fighting in Ukraine. He stressed that Russia has the advantage right now. Ukraine is running low on manpower, is running low on interceptors, and the way he presented it is Russia is getting ready to mobilize. And with that manpower, they have the opportunity to really push the front back for the first time in a long time.
Quick side note on that, just since he's on that topic. There was 10 drone strikes in or I think it was higher than that, but by the time I went to bed, there was 10 drone strikes in the small town that I live in here in Ukraine. And it was over 50 wounded and 2 babies, basically 4 years old, killed, including their mother. Oh, no, I'm sorry. It was a 4-year-old and her 14-year-old sister and the mother. Can you imagine that father? I heard which strike I think was the one that did it because it was big and it was near the city center. And I hopped in my car and tried to head over there because I have medical background. And because I'm in a small city, sometimes first responder assets can be spread pretty thin. So I have military ID and stuff. So I jumped in the car with my medical bag and headed over there. I actually couldn't find where the strike was, but it blows my mind, dude. We see, and this is just in the little town that I'm in, dude. This is happening every day in Kyiv, every day over in Dnipro, in every day in all Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, Konstantinivka. Well, obviously Konstantinivka. Over in Zap. I mean, it's awful, man. Anyways, I wanted to share that with you guys.
So this was Ratcliffe stepping in and saying, please don't, because he sees that Ukraine is about to fall. I think that's a bit of a stretch, but either way, that's one of the Russian assessments. The other one here is from Dmitriev, is thinking that Ratcliffe was showing up to tell him how the United States would respond in the event of a further test or even an attack on a NATO ally. And we're going to get into this here in a minute, but there's been a handful of items so far that arguably could be referred to as an attack against NATO, and it would not be a stretch if the country wanted to invoke Article 5 to discuss these at the very least. Dmitriev thinks that Ratcliffe might be showing up very similar to 2021, where we said, we know you're getting ready to go in. You should not, and you should know that we are going to provide Ukraine with weapons, which is believed to be the conversation that happened back in, I believe it was November 2021. That's Dmitriev. Another one here, Yuri Banachek, says Ratcliffe could be useful to Trump in two opposite scenarios. The first is a warning to Moscow. If Russia is not ready to soften its conditions for ending the war, the United States may expand support for Kyiv, primarily in the areas of intelligence and long-range strikes. The second is negotiation. If Moscow is ready to make certain concessions, limiting American intelligence support for Ukraine could be part of a deal. There's a third option, a broader discussion about the risk of direct confrontation between Russia and NATO. Those first few things have been very open, very publicly discussed. So I'm hard-pressed to believe, again, that the CIA director travels secretly to Moscow to talk about conditions for ending the war and what we may or may not do in terms.
Also, part of the reason it feels like an emergency to me is because why put him on one of these extremely trackable, big old military cargo jets? Why not? Like, if this was supposed to be super under the radar, they have ways to move important assets, important people like this, but putting them on one of those big I don't know what it was, I guess a C-130 or something, it seems like an oversight that could have been made, because it had to happen immediately, basically saying, okay, get him on the next flight out, go, rather than trying to figure out a sneaky way to get him over to Russia.
In terms of ramping up or removing support for Ukraine, those are conversations that we have heard the vice president have in public. We have seen those conversations with the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of the Army when he went to Ukraine to talk, and certainly Witkoff and Kushner. It would be unusual, I think, for that to all of a sudden fall on the CIA director. Two Majors, another Russian mill blogger, actually took this a totally different direction. He said the number and quality of Ukraine's drones received by the EU can actually replace a series of nuclear strikes in terms of damage, which would trigger the provisions of the Russian Federation's nuclear deterrence doctrine. So he says that's why the United States is going over there saying, Russia, stop. Ease up. We're paying attention. Please don't overreact, or, according to Two Majors, react appropriately by using a nuclear response to these Ukrainian drone strikes. So again, we've got President Trump saying it's nothing. When you run through some of the scenarios of what it could be, I feel like it's something pretty significant here. In fact, what I land on personally is David over at Malcontent News. Great source, by the way. I'm going to link all of their channels in the description below. They're just awesome and very, very consistent and detailed in the assessments they put out. But he just kind of consolidated what I was thinking and put it in better words than I could. It's about testing NATO. And we've seen Russia trying to do this for some time, and they may view an opening. Malcontent News said, quote, to a Western observer, Russia conducting a limited military engagement against a NATO nation seems not only impossible, but a terrible decision. But within Putin's inner circle, Russia is not only winning the Russia-Ukraine war, but Ukraine will be defeated by the end of the year. The United States is weak, NATO is divided, and Russia has a date with destiny. It is possible the Kremlin views that the time has come to test NATO resolve. He said, additionally, Russia could be reaching the conclusion that a brief military engagement into NATO territory will have minimal consequences. NATO troops won't enter Russian territory, while support for Ukraine could be dissolved, driven by Europe's urgent need to defend against a Russian provocation. That's one of those things that sounds crazy and realistic at the same time. There is no scenario where Russia would want to take on NATO right now in a conventional war. That would not go well for Russia, not by a long shot. Russia knows that, or at least most of the planners inside of Russia know that. They wouldn't be trying to initiate a full-scale war with NATO. They are trying to make sure, or trying to get a full understanding of what does an Article 5 response actually look like. Is the alliance fractured? And this is something we've talked about on this channel repeatedly. Anytime we throw just a little cold water on the idea that we would or wouldn't stand with our NATO partners, it just opens the door for Putin to want to test that out. Why wouldn't he? All right. And he's already started doing that in just recent weeks. We had countless drones that have flown into NATO territory. But again, all of this cited here in the Malcontent news piece. They talk about Germany finding a third military-grade drone at the Leipzig-Halle airport. This is a...
Hold on, I'm going to want to talk about that stuff, but this is a direct result of not setting a stronger precedent against the bad actors of the world. I talk a lot about setting a precedent on this channel. I made a whole video about it. But when we allowed Russia to and by we, I mean free countries all over the world, when we allowed Russia to full-scale invade Ukraine and not help in a more direct capacity, right? There was tons of help with supplies and finances and all that stuff, which undoubtedly has made it so Ukraine has been able to fight back as well as they have been. But with that said, this was an astronomical, a massive attack on democracy and freedom globally. This was a massive test of, let's see what these free nations are willing to do for an ally, right? Yes, Ukraine was not in NATO. Everybody knows that. But regardless, this basically showed all the bad actors of the world, Russia, China, Iran, North Korea, that these things can happen, and the only consequence that they're going to receive is probably some sanctions, which most of these countries have learned to live with already, and the West will be helping supplies and logistics to the country. So setting that precedent, this is what happens when we set that weak-ass precedent to the bad actors. Now it starts to compound on itself, right? Now we have what's happening in Iran with the Strait of Hormuz. Now because of that, we have the Houthis doing the same thing in the Red Sea. Because of that, not because of those, but now we've got North Korea sending troops and labor personnel by the thousands into Russia. Now we have China doing military drills all around Taiwan. It just compounds and compounds and compounds because everybody knows the West isn't a threat, dude. They will not do anything. They're going to try to detour escalation as much as possible up until the point they are completely backed up into a corner and surrender, basically, is what it feels like. So, yeah, let's move on.
Critical NATO logistics base, and they're just putting together this report saying we're working on who's responsible here, but 3 military-grade drones at an airport. It looks like a detonator failed on one of them, where there were 4 Ukrainian AN-124 transports stationed, and a significant amount of NATO aid to Ukraine flows through that airport. Like, it's not explosive-laden drones, all right? These weren't like commercial drones being flown around to take pictures and recon. They had explosive charges, right? That's what we're starting to see more and more.
In what world is that not an infringement of the NATO coalition and treaty? In what world is that not an attack in a NATO member country? I don't understand. And the argument that's always used with this asymmetric warfare is the fact that it can't be directly tied back to Russia, because Russia paid somebody using Telegram. They contacted somebody on Telegram, used them, say, hey, we're going to supply you with this stuff. We're going to pay you. What we need you to do is this with the drones, or plant this bomb here, or hack into this thing over here. That's how they operate their asymmetric warfare. So there's plausible deniability, and it doesn't lead directly back to Russia, even though everybody knows it's directly from Russia and the FSB and Putin. How is this not a direct attack into a NATO country? There's also been multiple strikes and bombings of these drone manufacturing facilities in different European countries, like Italy, like Germany, like France, where they have these basically these manufacturing sites that are helping make drones for Ukraine. Randomly, these are starting to um, get bombed. It doesn't take a brain scientist to figure out this is probably Russia's doing. Who else receives any benefit from blowing up these drone manufacturing warehouses?
Likely
Which those
from Russia.
should also be constituted as attacks in NATO member states.
We had a Russian KH-101 cruise missile that entered Polish airspace back on July 29th. It sounds like more and more the evidence supports that that was intended to strike in Poland. Again, according to Malcontent News, they said privately, Polish officials believe the incident was meant to test NATO's air defenses. Yes. All right. They've got an excuse to do that. It's not just a matter of can NATO detect and shoot these weapon systems down? Can they identify the Russian drones? Can they shoot down the Russian missiles? It's what does that response actually look like? I mean, we're also seeing Russian drones repeatedly violating Romanian airspace and territorial waters. This has ramped up in recent days. Every one of these, and it's like a toddler in a sense, right? Kind of poking and always prodding, or maybe just a kid trying to find out where that line is. And all of these little things, like we are not going to start World War III because a drone flew off track and accidentally landed in a field and didn't hurt anybody in Poland. That's a ridiculous reason for nuclear weapons to launch. I think we can all agree on that. But what if it's just a little bit more, and then just a little bit more? And what if it's a sabotage operation that Russia maybe wanted to have happen, but technically it wasn't a Russian citizen. It was somebody that maybe through a few connections was paid by. You see how you just go down this path where Russia can keep poking in this hybrid warfare sense. But I would argue that missiles flying into NATO territory, that drones flying into NATO territory, that kamikaze-style one-way attack drones at a NATO airport, we've crossed that line. Now, I don't know that the response, and I've talked about what I believe the response should be. It should be stacking up a heavy air defense presence, kind of a no-fly zone in western Ukraine, have their permission, and stand it up along NATO's eastern flank, and just make sure for Russia's sake, honestly, as a big part of this, that nothing gets through and no accidents are made. But
Great idea. Preston's obviously a bit more conservative when it comes to some of his ideas than I am, right? I would be considered extreme in some of my ideas. This is a much more moderate style response to where theoretically even you don't even have to put any foreigners in Ukraine. You can operate in the Western Ukrainian airspace with their basically exactly what they're doing with Operation Eastern Century or whatever, where Eastern European and European countries are pretty much building a drone wall behind Ukraine. They could do that, but just up inside of Ukraine, even up to Kyiv, and stop all of these bombings and strikes that are killing so many civilians, women and children. Imagine that, dude. That would even mitigate, depending on how active this air defense would be, right, from these Western allies, that could mitigate this massive hole that Ukraine has with in regards to not having any Patriots, not having any missile interceptors. If there were friendly air assets controlling the skies, you don't need to worry too much about that. But I don't know. I've always been a fan of that idea. I think Preston's spot on with that. That would be a great idea.
Either way, my view on all of this is that Russia is testing Ukraine, or is testing NATO. They're going to continue testing NATO, and they may have had something in the works that would have ramped this up to a 9 or a 10, which is why the CIA director flew over quietly, unannounced, yesterday, had his conversation with their Russian counterpart saying, we know what you're up to. We know what you're thinking about doing. Don't. Or if you do this, just be ready. We see that it's coming. Of course, we'll see if there's any information on this is ever made public. Very well may be classified for years and years on end. Now, as a quick fundraiser update, we just delivered the 25th vehicle through our campaign for Cars for Ukraine. I'll put up some pictures here of that van. It's actually heading out to the 2nd Battalion Seraphims, a new drone unit in the 104th Territorial Defense Brigade. This campaign is going on all year, and we're just getting ready to kick off our fall push, so kind of a sub-campaign within it. New patches coming out. Should be able to share that with you in the next week or so. In the meantime, you can check out these merch collabs we've got going on with Car for Ukraine and Ziggy's Paw. We've got shirts, sweatshirts, posters with unique designs. Actually, I'm rocking my Ziggy's Paw Built Under Fire shirt right here. So solid stuff. And 100% of the proceeds, 100% of the profits from the Car for Ukraine and Ziggy's Paw designs go directly to support those organizations. So for those interested, those links will be in the pinned comment and description below. But that's all we got for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.
Super cool, man. Check out Preston's doing so much cool stuff when it comes to fundraising and helping in that that kind of sphere of things. So cool. Check it out, you guys. One more thing I wanted to cover, and then we can end it here. This response, we've been hearing more and more about nukes. Russia potentially considering the use of nuclear warfare because they're trying to rationalize the fact that this amount of Ukrainian drones and the damage they're creating could be equivalent to a nuke, right? So they're saying, well, now that requires a response with a nuclear weapon. It doesn't make sense, but Russia doesn't do things that make sense. The point I wanted to make is if Russia was ever going to launch a nuke at Ukraine and in hopes of it being successful, right now is the best time to do it. Ukraine has never had such a low amount of missile interceptors. The United States, under Trump's leadership, has no intention of getting the rights to the Patriot missile system, so Ukraine can build their own. Has no intention of giving Ukraine that. Has no intention of giving Ukraine any more Patriot missile systems because, frankly, they probably need them themselves at this point. There are some domestically made European missile interceptors that are being delivered, for example, through France. But with that said, that's going to take a while to get them here, get them active, learn how to use them. There's no better time to strike Ukraine with a nuke than right now. So, and I guarantee Putin knows that, and that's probably why there's this talk about it would be a rational or an equivalent level response to respond to all the drone attacks in Russia with a nuke, because they're also realizing, hey, we're having a pretty good success rate with our missiles right now because they have no way to shoot them down. That would be nuts. Absolutely insane, man. God, I hope that's not the case. Anyways, let me know what you guys think about all of this, man. This is crazy. Always some crazy stuff going on, man. Please like, share, subscribe again. Check out P Money's channel. He's the GOAT. I love you guys. We'll see you in the next video.